hit plays, so check this. This is the hard knock life, but not the chicka kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share the interest together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't.
We are back on Hard Knock Life. Your eyes don't deceive you. We've taken some time off, and to be completely candid, I didn't really want to bring the show back, but I had to, because over the weekend, a few days ago, I guess, Michelle Rodriguez broke the nerd internet by claiming some stuff on TMZ and then walking it back, but not really on Facebook. And so thought we should convene another Hard Knock Life to respond to the nerd outrage from both sides over some of the things that Michelle Rodriguez said about people of color and superheroes and all that stuff. So in order to do so, I thought I'd bring on two special guests to speak with me tonight on Hard Knock Life. Our first guest is actually someone who's been on the site before. He's a returning champion, as it were. He's a special guest on Hard Knock Life tonight. You can find him on Twitter at Will Evans Writes. He's also the editor-in-chief of my favorite website on the internet, blacknerdproblems.com. Please welcome, live from Columbus, Ohio, my man Will Evans. What's up, Will?
Hey, what's up? What's up? How we doing?
Thanks for coming back and joining us on Hard Knock Life. One of the reasons I wanted to bring the show back was that you graciously let us cross-post your take on the whole Michelle Rodriguez thing. So before I get into your take on what went down, let me just give a little bit of background. Sure. Michelle Rodriguez is an actress known for the Fast and Furious franchise, and TMZ kind of caught her off guard with a question about whether or not she should be cast in as Green Lantern, I guess, in a Justice League movie. And well, what was her response?
The response was, we need to stop stealing white people's superheroes, and which is baffling on so many levels. I mean, if you just go at it on the strict nerd level, it is very obvious Michelle Rodriguez has no idea what the hell Green Lantern is, and maybe all she knows is Ryan Reynolds. That's possible.
Unfortunate.
Right. But that's probably like one of the few comic book characters that she could have been asked about where that wouldn't have at least gotten the snicker of, okay, well, that's not really about white superheroes as much as you think, but that's on a granular level. The reality is, you said at the top, Michelle Rodriguez is known for the Fast and Furious movies. Michelle Rodriguez is known for doing a lot of dumb shit. And so to say there was nothing surprising about the story, besides the fact that people are still putting like microphones in front of Michelle Rodriguez's face. But I guess what kind of prompted me to really look at it more is like, man, when I watched the video, or watched as much of the video as I could, because I was definitely not like under the influence enough to enjoy the video as much as Michelle was when she was recording it. But it is Michelle Rodriguez's fan page, and I'm looking at the comments, and I'm just kind of wondering if like people are taking her to task, or if people are going to be like, hey, yeah, I got what you were saying, yada yada, and it felt like everyone was like, oh no, you're 100% right. You're 100% right the first time. You don't need to apologize, and it was like overwhelming. And I was like, okay, that's her fan page. But then, as a couple other, spots I see on the internet, whether it's an article or just people just commenting on a period, everyone was like, hey, man, Michelle's 100% right. And I'm like, what? Wait, what? Like, what? Like, how is this? How can someone say in 2015, stop stealing blank, blank, blank from white people, and people are like, yeah, that's that shit right there. Like I couldn't comprehend that. So that's kind of what the nexus was for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, there's a lot to unpack in this whole thing. I mean, we're kind of using the Michelle Rodriguez scandal / fiasco / gaffe / whatever as a kicking off point, but I think there are actually several arguments in sure. her videos, and then the kind of the swirl around it on the internet that I think we should try to unpack here. But before we do, I want to bring on another guest, another special guest. This is someone who's making her debut on Hard Knock Life and is also soon to make her debut on the Nerds of Color. It's our newest contributor. She's hailing from Sacramento, California, by way of New York and Virginia and all over the country. Please welcome to Hard Knock Life and the Nerds of Color, Valerie Complex. Welcome to the show, Valerie.
How are you?
You have expressed some feelings about Michelle Rodriguez. Would you mind sharing just quickly with the viewing and listening audience what your thoughts on Michelle Rodriguez are?
Well, where do I start? Michelle Rodriguez, like I said before, she's always been problematic. She's, you know, going back to the days of her homophobic comments and then, you know, deciding to come out when it was convenient for her, was problematic to me. So again, like William, this doesn't surprise me. Well, I caught several things from what she said. One, her being completely misinformed. I don't think just about Green Lantern, but about the state of comic movies in general, or comic books in general. I don't think she knows much about them. I don't think she even picks up a book to read. You know, forget about a comic. But there's that, and then, you know, the problematic words that she used, stealing, and, you know, in her apology, being lazy. The one thing about, you know, the stealing or whatever, you know, it's almost just like saying there's reverse racism going on in Hollywood because,
right,
you know, we're stealing everything from white people. As if, you know, the comic book world is about to run out of white superheroes, that we need to stop right now or there'll be none left. So that comment was obviously not well thought out. And then with the laziness, only a lazy person can tell other people they're lazy. Because if she wasn't being lazy, then she would know that that is not the case. People are creating their own narratives. People are out there trying to, you know, push and endorse their own material. Sometimes it's just not as easy. And if she would do some research, then she probably would have known that. So that's my little issue with that.
Can I piggyback on something Val kind of touched on about the stealing, and it feels like semantics, but the first thing I thought when I read that quote or watched it, whatever, when she said stop stealing people's, you know, white people's superheroes, you know, you could look at it like, okay, stop trying to put you know, people of color on top of traditionally white superheroes. My first instinct was like, no, that's my superhero. Like, I don't, you know, regardless of what iteration, you know, Superman or Spider-Man is, you mean white people superheroes. I like Spider-Man. That's my superhero too. Mm-hmm. And kind of looking at it from that scope, like there is I feel, because I indulge in these characters, I read comic books and yada yada, like I have an ownership of that too. And so even if we're not talking about the race or ethnicity of the superhero itself, the fact that we can't be included in that, like that's not our entertainment or our hobby as well, kind of speaks to that too. So I just kind of had that, as Val was talking, I kind of thought about that, like, right, you know, white people superheroes, whether it's superheroes that are white or superheroes that belong to the white audience, I think both of those things are obviously hugely problematic.
I don't think, you know, white people don't own these superheroes. They just happen to be white. You know, they don't own, okay, if you want to look at it at a technical level, okay, well, Marvel and DC are probably owned by white individuals, whatever. But, you know, you don't own these characters. So I think that that's really a lot of who shot John. You know, it's crap. Like, they don't own anything.
Sure.
And I think this is where what I was referring to about, like, there are several arguments that are kind of like bundled up into the whole, you know, in first in Michelle's kind of like dismissiveness of the Green Lantern question, and then in her walk back about the being lazy and we should create our own stories, and then, you know, that kind of, like, as Will mentioned, spurned a lot of columns and articles about people saying, yes, we should create our own stories. And I think so. I want to tackle that piece first, and then we'll jump into the fact of whether or not white people are the proper owners of superhero narrative. But so there's this idea that in the apology in the Facebook video, that what she was trying to clarify was that, you know, us people of color, Michelle Rodriguez being part of that tribe, should spend more time creating our own characters, our own comic books, our own mythologies, and stop trying to fit ourselves into, you know, the white superheroes like the Green Lanterns or the Supermans, whatever. So there's been a lot of support in that argument, right? A lot of folks, like a column that you referenced in your column is Joe Willage, who is a former editor of DC Comics and worked on Milestone. He actually said that's actually, you know, he argues that's actually there's truth in that statement, that, you know, there isn't enough support necessarily for people who are out there in the trenches, you know, doing books for Dark Horse and Image and web comics and independent comics that are people of color. You have books like Concrete Park and, you know, David Walker doing Shaft and Dynamite,
Sure.
who's going to be doing Cyborg soon for DC. So on that phase, like, there's truth to Michelle Rodriguez saying that we should spend more time creating our own heroes, but is that really the argument that you know is being made in the whole stealing white people's superheroes?
I think it's a convenient fallback, you know, when everyone was like, "Oh my God, what did you say?" Like I said, you know, and I definitely don't want to like quote my column or whatever, but I said this. I think that there's plenty there's plenty of truth and agreement that can be had in that, right? Like, we should spend more time creating, you know, certain characters, new characters, things like that. Yes, but there are people doing that, and it didn't feel like Michelle Rodriguez didn't say, "Hey, we're doing these things, we need to do more." She said we need to do it. Right, and there's a difference. Right? Yeah. There's a difference between saying we need to grow what this thing that we're currently doing, and we're not doing this thing and we need to do it. She just doesn't know, right? And but that also goes to, we're talking about the what Michelle Rodriguez knows or doesn't, or we're talking about, when we talk about diversity, most of the time we're talking about Marvel and DC. And talking about comic books, right? Which is, and you know, I've been guilty of falling into that conversation. I think all of us that discuss these things at length probably do that at some point, because it's easy to do, because they're the most visible. And, you know, right before here we were just talking about how awesome that Age of Ultron trailer looks. You know what I mean? Like, those are the ones that are kind of in our face. But that is a mistake. That is a mistake to talk about diversity in comic books and drill it down to those two only. But it is not a mistake to include them, right? It's not a mistake to hold them accountable. Like why can't I read an indie comic and enjoy that, and enjoy this indie comic and celebrate it, and, you know, however I do that, but also still want to see diversity in the comic books with the biggest platform. Right? Yeah. I think we can do both. I don't understand why we can't do both. And I feel like people feel like there's a finite amount of energy and attention that people can pay to something. I don't necessarily think I agree with that. Not in this space, right? So that's one of the things for me. Like, yeah, we can spend more time growing, you know, new characters, new stories, things like that, and that's fine. But there's also a business side of it too. Like, new characters in comic books rarely do extremely well, right? Like, that's just kind of the staple. That's why we've had the same top 12, top 20 comic book characters for 50 plus years. Creating new characters that will sell in, you know, comic book shops and things like that is a really hard thing to do in the comic book world. Just new characters, period. Let alone people of color, right? Like, I'll give you like a small example. So, you know, I read and I review for Black Nerd Problems the Avengers comic books, all those comic books, and it's Jonathan Hickman's writing them right now. And like, I was so thrilled that Amadeus Cho showed up in like a major storyline. Right. Like this one, and I'd already done an interview, I think you guys ran on the site, the interview I did with Greg Pak, who created that character. Right. And I always wonder, especially creators of color, if they did create a character, and then when, what happens, how do they feel when that character never gets picked up again, or gets picked up very sparingly? And then how do they feel when they kind of just show up? And so that was a very cool thing for me, but it reminded me that here was this really cool character that he had created, and then he puts it out into the quote-unquote Marvel world, and we see very little of him, you know?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the interesting thing about like Marvel and DC too, is that any character you create for those two companies especially become their characters, right? Like
Absolutely.
That you know, any work you're doing at Marvel and DC is work for hire, basically. So, you know, even though that Greg Pak is the one who created Amadeus Cho, he's basically just giving Marvel Comics another toy to play with, and
Sure.
it's up to Marvel to decide what to do with it. And that's why I think there's, I think the point that Will you make is accurate, because oftentimes the argument around diversity in like nerd circles, or especially on the internet, is I feel a false choice. It's either or, right? Either you support, you know, independent comic creators, or you don't, or you're only you know, all you know about is Marvel and DC, and all you want is acceptance and validation by the big two. Whereas I see it as more of a both and. Like, to speak to what you're saying, is like, no, I think we should definitely go out there and buy Shaft from David Walker. We should definitely go out there and buy Concrete Park by Eric Alexander and Tony Prater. We should definitely go out and support the Milestone guys who are coming back with, you know, the new incarnation of Milestone. Right. Like, we should do that, and we should also hold Marvel and DC accountable for creating more characters of color, more representation of women, more representation of gay and lesbian characters, and also, when they transcend the comic book medium for movies and television, that they should open up the casting to people beyond just white people. And I think that's the other side of the coin, Valerie, with this whole argument, is that on the one hand, it kind of like deflected to this whole thing about the comic books. But what kicked it all off was the suggestion that Michelle Rodriguez, who is a Latina, who is at least bisexual, who could represent all these other groups, playing a character like the Green Lantern, as William mentioned, who's not necessarily relegated to one specific race or one specific ethnicity, one specific gender. The fact that we could take or even species, that we could take a character who's traditionally white in the comic books and cast somebody else who's not white, not male, not straight, not cis, whatever, that should be okay. So I think that's the other side of the argument, where you see a lot of, you know, characters who are traditionally white who are potentially cast by non-white actors, and then the shitstorm that always, you know, kicks off on the internet. So Valerie, what's your sense of that? Like the idea of casting non-white people in roles that are traditionally white people?
I think a lot of it has to do with comics being inducted into mainstream pop culture, because now you have all of these, I call them pretenders, you know, people that like comic book movies that may have picked up an Iron Man comic or two recently after they saw the first film, or, you know, people that are now into Thor now that they've seen the movies. I think now those people feel like they have a voice, and, you know, it's just giving a platform to racists and bigots and sexists and stuff like that. Because think about it, the comic book culture is really, even internationally, is a small facet of society. It's bigger than the anime community, but it's still a small community, you know, culturally. But now that it's in the movies, of course they're gonna try to push, you know, what you see in film, they're going to try to push that in the comics. So that means more white faces, more this, more that. But I think TV is doing a lot better in terms of diversity as opposed to the films. Like, for example, I forget his name, but with the casting of Supergirl, they casted that gentleman in the Jimmy Olsen role, and people went nuts. And I'm like, how many of you assholes read Supergirl? Like, how many of you have read that?
Yeah.
So why are you complaining about him being black when you've never even picked up the comic? And I think that a lot of that just has to do with, you know, just general, you know, pop culture getting involved in the comic book scene and kind of tearing it to shreds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that definitely. I mean, one of the things that you know, if you want to set a flame war on the internet, you just suggest a person who's not white to play a character who is white. I would know from experience, because it's happened to me twice on the Nerds of Color. Last year, I probably the first thing that blew up on our blog was my post about how Netflix should consider, I didn't even say cast, right? I was like, consider an Asian American actor to play Iron Fist. And that got picked up by Comics Alliance. It got picked up by this Asian American activist organization that started a petition around it. And then so I have never seen so much internet hate directed towards me in my life for suggesting that a dude that I grew up thought was Asian American and then later in life found out was white, was like, maybe we should just at least consider an actor. And then recently we published a piece by the artist Alice Mei-Chi Lee about how the new Marvel Spider-Man, if they're going to make him Peter Parker, they should cast a Korean American guy to play him because he's from Queens, and Queens is like, there are a lot of Asian people in Queens, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So the point is for both cross-racial castings, and this is true for Johnny Storm being played by Michael B. Jordan, or Heimdall being played by Idris Elba, or Iris West and Joe West being played by Candace Patton and Jesse L. Martin. There's nothing culturally or inherently white about those particular characters that if you were to flip the races, that it doesn't change the story. So that.
But I love the comments like, well, what if a white person played Black Panther or Luke Cage?
It's my favorite comment on the internet.
That's how you know somebody is totally unknowledgeable about comics, because if they knew that, then they would know that being from Africa, or Luke Cage being from New York, from Harlem, from Hell's Kitchen or whatever, is a part of their myth, the character mythos.
Right.
So people are just saying that because they're just angry and they don't have any more arguments to pull out their ass. So I especially hate those comments. But you see, even with Captain America and Thor and situations like that, where the mantle's being passed down, like Steve Rogers is still around. Thor Odinson is still around, but the mantle's been passed and people are still complaining. It's like, I don't know. I just think it's
which is a shame, because both of those books are really good right now.
They are.
and I wonder, and I'm sure there are people that are just like, oh, I'm not gonna mess with that, and they're missing out. Like Jason Aaron, who wrote the God of Thunder series just previous to the new Thor, he's still writing Thor. Like, that's a really good book. Like, Rick Remender is doing really well in that all new Captain America, and I'm wondering if that will persevere, break through a little. It's easy to shout something down when something's not of the quality, right? Like, oh, see, I told you, why would I even mess with it anyway? But we'll see if it reverts back. I mean, that's kind of the assumption. Like, we'll get Steve Rogers as Captain America back again, and we'll get Odin's son, who we didn't know was Odin's son until he lost the hammer, is back as Thor. And that very well may happen, but like right now, these are really quality books, and it's just I think that will kind of test just how much of this is it's a change, and I like change, or it's just straight up bigotry. Because
there is a strain of argument, and this actually comes from not just like racist white folk. There's also a strain of argument from like the progressive kind of like left wing, the progressive side of the progressive comic book fan, right? Who also polices this and says that actually superheroes are white, and making a black Captain America or making Jimmy Olsen blacker is just painting blackface on white characters. What do you say to that? The idea when we say something like there is nothing inherently white about Peter Parker, inherently white about Jimmy Olsen, and then so that's why it's okay to cast non-white actors in those roles. And I'm talking more about like the transcending the comic book page and into like other media like television and movies. That argument from that side, not from like the racist, because it's easy to shout down the racist bigots, right? But you have the other side that says that comic books are inherently white. The superhero genre is a white power fantasy, and that making a black Captain America or making a black Jimmy Olsen is just basically blackface on a white character. How do you respond to that, Will?
Pandering. That's the word.
I think, well, I mean, besides just saying I think it's bullshit, I think that it really is inherent in the writer, in the actor. If you're talking about, a TV movie, you're not going to. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, is Samuel Jackson just kind of blackface on Nick Fury? No, he's Samuel fucking Jackson. He's his character. He's his personality. I think that you can try to make an argument of, maybe someone might think it's patronizing. Oh, okay, well, just making this character black to try to some faux inclusion. But the reality is, it's going to be in the hands of the creator, right? And it's going to be in the hands of whoever's writing that character, whoever's portraying that character. And that kind of goes out the window. I mean, we look at these things as blank vessels, like no one's going to write, a Spider-Man. Like if Spider-Man is black in a comic book not named Miles Morales, if Peter Parker was black in the comic book tomorrow, we're acting like that's an empty vessel, that he's just going to be black and he's going to have the same stories from the last 50 years. No, like that power lies in the writer, right? And if there's going to be a black Peter Parker or Asian Peter Parker or whatever in the Marvel movies, then I'm looking to that character. Like that whole argument of, well, this is just kind of a blackface, whiteface type of thing. Let's see how it's portrayed. Now if the studio gives notes like, hey, I don't want none of that ethnic shit on my Peter Parker, well, then that's a different story, right? Like if you're trying to put a character on rails and limit him some kind of way, then that's a different story. But I want to see what the creator does with it first. I want to see what people do with it first before I just make some blanket statement that this is patronizing and just caving to a population.
And I think one of the examples where changing the race of a character from white to non-white has actually, I think, given more power to that particular character is something like the Flash, where the West family, who has traditionally been white in the comic books, Iris West. I guess her father's not actually a comic book character, but whatever. But right. Iris West is the aunt of the eventual Kid Flash, Wally West. So that by default, that when they ever introduce Wally West on the Flash TV show, he'll be African American. But the point I'm trying to make is that Joe West, the character portrayed by Jesse L. Martin, is one of the best characters on television. Without doubt. One of the best television characters right now on the screen is a black father. I think is like powerful. It's powerful that they if that could have been like Jonathan Kent from Smallville. They could have cast like Bo Duke playing him, and it would still be great, but it wouldn't be as powerful as seeing Jesse L. Martin being a father to Iris and to Barry. So. Even if they may not necessarily play into like black tropes with his character, because there's actually been criticism even from the Nerds of Color about how Iris West doesn't necessarily show, there haven't been like conversations about race like explicitly on the show. Yeah. But I think
that's a TV thing too. I get you. Yeah.
But I think visually it's enough to show that this is a functional black family with a white adopted son, and one of the best characters on television is a black father. What do you think about that?
I think now with the mental gymnastics that people try to play on you when they're talking about things like pandering and why make white characters black or whatever, but the things that you have to go through to explain to people why a certain character of color shouldn't be white, like this whole Ghost in the Shell situation that really has me. Because see, I'm originally an anime. I'm an anime fanatic. I am a comic book fan by way of anime. This and like the Major is one of my favorite anime characters, and I just can't understand why people don't have a problem. I mean, people do have a problem with Scarlett Johansson being cast, but the excuses that you hear are so amazing. Like, well, the characters aren't, they're not drawn strictly Japanese, so that is just, so that's one. Or, the storyline could center around anybody, which if they knew about a story, then they would know that, her character being Japanese is kind of essential to the story. But anyway, the point being...
I mean, her name is Motoko Kusanagi. That's the whitest name I've ever heard.
I know, but certain people just want to own everything. They just
I think that also goes back to this idea that universal means white, right? Like default is
Right.
white. So like you can't, the by just putting like, so for example, like having an Asian American Peter Parker, like nothing has to change, right? Like he can still be from Queens, he can still take care of his Aunt May, he can still be a photographer, like all of that stuff. He's still a high school kid. Nothing changes other than the fact that, like, Stephen Yeun is under the mask instead of Tobey Maguire, right? That's the only thing that's different, and people still lose their shit over it. And I think it's because, Peter Parker's a universal story. He's an everyman, and everyman is code for white man, right? That's really what it boils down to.
I agree with that. Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's where the whole idea of like stealing white superheroes and white superheroes being like equitable to like whiteness comes from the idea that the default status in America is, like I said earlier, straight white heterosexual male, and that's what the superhero genre and the fanboys who kind of like indulge in it see themselves as, right? Like I can't, if I'm a white dude living in middle America, I can't identify with like an Asian Peter Parker. Meanwhile, I'm an Asian dude who's been identifying with like a white Superman and a white Batman and a white Green Lantern and a white Flash my whole life, right?
Right. Specifically as you were talking about Spider-Man, like one of the things, and Brian Michael Bendis, I think he did an interview with Vulture, I want to say, a while ago, and they were just kind of asking him, maybe it was like a certain year anniversary of like Miles Morales and everything. So they were asking him about a bunch of his characters and comics, but they were talking about Miles, and he said before they even went to print, before they even did the first art of Miles, and this is going to be this new Spider-Man, he said that he had an alarming number of black comic book fans that would come up to him at conventions and everything, and they heard he was going to be writing a new Spider-Man, and they thought it was awesome when rumors started to get out that he might not be white, and he said people always told him it was easier for them to picture Spider-Man as black because of the mask,
right?
And so Bendis tells that story about having that extra bump, that extra piece of validation from these fans coming up to him, because nothing, as you said, nothing has to change. Nothing has to change. There's nothing empirical about Peter Parker or about Clark Kent. Clark Kent's a damn Superman. He's an alien, yo. Like this isn't even like a white American story, And there's nothing that has to change in the makeup of a character for him to be a different race with 90% of comic book characters. Maybe that's a little high. There are some that have specific origins, obviously, depending on where they were born or whatever. But so many comic book characters that we are familiar with, that we talk about, that are the big mainstream ones, there's very little that's implicit about that informs their race, that informs their ethnicity, whatever the case, or orientation or whatever.
Right.
And it cracks me up, like having these arguments with people, because I can't wait to see what the internet does when we get our first like Superman that identifies as gay or transsexual or something. Like that's an explosion that's going to happen. Here's the thing: it's going to happen, right? Like there is going to be a motivation. It may not be canon, whatever the hell, but it's going to happen, and I'm actually just waiting for that. I can't wait to see that,
Well, and I think it also speaks to like, Valerie, you talked about this earlier about like, that argument of like, well, if you're going to make Superman black, then you should give us a white Black Panther, and like the kind of like ignorance of like where those characters come from. But it also I think it shows a drawback to like the comic book format as well, in that for the longest time, any characters of color who were created were specifically tied to their ethnicity, right? Like,
sure.
Like Black Panther was black because that was the only way they could make a black character, right? Like he had to be tied to his ethnicity. Like any Asian superhero, like the three that exist, are either martial artists, shoot fireworks out of their hands, or like a result of the Hiroshima bomb, right? Like there's no other way you could be an Asian superhero other than those three like motivating factors. So like I think that's the other kind of like weakness of the genre, that yes, the idea that to make Iron Fist, who's like bathed in cultural appropriation anyway. Make that dude Asian American, and you kind of like strip away all the cultural appropriation, right? Like, I mean, that's a controversial statement, I know, because a lot of folks have taken me to task for like, why would you want the lone like martial arts superhero to be Asian? I'm like, well, because like there's nothing wrong with like martial arts as an art, because like every other superhero is a martial artist, right? Batman's a martial artist, Green Arrow's a martial artist, but the thing is, I'm tired of like the trope. I'm tired of is the white dude who's better at being Asian than Asian people, right? And that's what Teddy Rand falls into. I'd like for once to see an Asian dude be good at being Asian in the comics, right? Like, can we have that? So, but Valerie, can just like that idea that characters of color have traditionally been tied to their ethnicity, and that's the main reason why it doesn't make sense to whitewash them. Although Hollywood isn't afraid to whitewash characters of color when they make movies anyway, right? So
all the time.
It's not even like something we can fall back on, right, Valerie?
I think, and this kind of goes back to what Michelle Rodriguez was talking about. I think people forget how difficult it is to even tied into what you said, to even get characters of color their own canon stories without some type of mix of their history, because maybe they feel like it's going to be relatable. I mean, if Miles Morales was a kid that grew up in Westchester, New York, and went to a private school, maybe people would think that it wouldn't sell as much because
he'd be an X-Man. The diverse crowd can't relate to, some preppy Miles Morales kid that's now Spider-Man or whatever. Yeah.
So I think they use those type of character mythos to relate to the audience, but I think that means that they're not giving us enough credit, because it's like, okay, well, all characters of color are poor and disadvantaged or come from Africa or whatever. And they have to work hard to build their whatever. And I just think that really kind of takes away. I mean, it can be done well. It really just depends on the creator. But I think that line of thinking can eventually take away from characters after a while. So I think they need to work on changing that. But something else I wanted to mention is I think a lot of times people forget how hard it is to create comics and what it takes to market comics. And what it takes to market comic films. Like, I think that if George Lucas can't even get funding to make a Red Tails film about black pilots, and he's a white man with a very famous franchise, then how hard is it going to be for someone like, William or yourself, Keith, or myself, to get our ideas off the ground? You know what I mean?
I mean, that's the other thing too, like where that kind of counter argument about like you should just create your own and stop complaining about DC and Marvel, just create your own. Like, that's great. Like, number one, I have created my own heroes like 5 years ago, and I'm still not getting calls from Hollywood, right? Because the thing about, like you said, Will, characters like Captain America, Batman, Superman, they're 75 years old. Like, they've been around for 7 decades, and they're only now really like dominating the pop culture marketplace, right? I don't have time to wait 70 years for like Secret Identities to make a movie, right? Like, that's why if there the opportunity for like Iron Fist is coming on TV next year. Right. You know what I mean? So Peter, the new Spider-Man is coming out in 2 years. Like, these are things that are immediate. These are where we can start seeing changes now. Again, it's not an either or. It's not like, okay, if you give me an Asian Spider-Man, then I'm gonna like not create Asian American characters anymore. That's not the case, like, right? Like, give me an Asian Spider-Man, but also give me like Asian other guys, right? Give me a black Spider-Man, but give me black other guys, right? Like, it's not an either or. It's a both and. I'm selfish in that way. I want to support and create original characters of color, but I also want to hold the big two accountable for having more representation in their Hollywood properties and in their comic books. Like, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a false choice to say either you support the big two and maintaining the status quo, or you don't. Like, no, I think you got to do both.
Like that, and obviously we're talking about comic books and things, but this is a conversation that that goes on with people of color just living in the United States of America every day in terms of how we conduct ourselves. Is it a situation where we should, create our own, what should we do in our communities? Should we strengthen our communities and keep to our own communities and kind of pull ourselves out? Or do we go by the byproduct of, for lack of a better term, infiltrating, general society, i.e., white society, to let them know that we're there, to let them know that we, that we're not going anywhere, and that they have to include us in the conversation. So I think this is an age-old, this is like, if I'm speaking about, black culture, this is like a W.E.B. Du Bois, like Booker T kind of conversation that applies to, this subculture. These are the kind of things that have been happening in different varies of life for a long time, and it's still a very diametrically opposed conversation with people like, the indie comics or the mainstream.
Right.
Me personally, I like to do both, but I also have a vested interest in holding the larger, more visible corporations or society or whatever, holding them accountable so that they can't just lock us out when they feel like it, like, oh, they have their own thing, so we don't have to worry about them anymore.
That directly ties into what I was going to say, because so we want these new narratives, but I think it has to start at the big two, and I think it has to start. They have an employee diversity problem. That's where it sort of starts from. So they need to start hiring more females and more writers of color, more artists of color, so that maybe we can get some stories that make sense. Because I'm reading the Storm book right now, and it's okay. But I wonder if it was written by someone that could make it a little bit more relatable. Will the work turn out? Now, I know, like, we have really great creators out there, and it doesn't matter who they are. Like, you have Gail Simone, and you have Jason Aaron, who's really great. And they've done a lot of work for females and, stuff like that. But sometimes, and that's a question that I'm asking the two of you, do you think more diversity within the companies, within the writers and the artists would equal more diversity?
I mean, I think it helps. There's two things that, again, if you're talking about like DC, since you're talking about DC and Marvel, like, for example, a couple weeks ago, DC made a big announcement that they've hired all of these new writers and artists. Like I said, David Walker's doing Cyborg, Gene Yang is doing Superman. Oh my God,
he's doing Superman, right? Yeah.
Like, Greg Pak, you mentioned Greg Pak earlier, and he tweeted out, like, the two writers responsible for Superman right now are two Asian Americans. Like, the most American superhero of all time is being written by two Asian American writers. That's a big deal. But at the same time, you can have people like Ming Doyle and Bernard Chang and David Walker kind of behind the scenes, but for the most part, those characters are those characters, right? Like, Barry Allen is still a white dude, Hal Jordan's still a white dude, and DC went through a phase in the 90s where they made an Asian Atom, they made they changed the race of, they made Batwoman a lesbian. I think she's still around. I don't know if she's still at the New 52.
Still around.
She's still around. She's still around, but they wouldn't let her get married.
They won't let her get married, right?
Being handled very, very poorly.
But you know what I mean? Like, so they went through a phase where they were trying to make more quote unquote ethnic characters. There was a Latino Blue Beetle, but at the same time, they default back to like their traditionally white characters. So like Jaime Reyes became Ted Kord again, and Cassandra Cain became Barbara Gordon again eventually, and like all of like the Ryan Choi's went back to being Ray Palmer. So like that's that kind of like borrowing of the cowl that people criticize, like Sam Wilson being Captain America, like the whole mantle passing usually reverts back to the original white guy. But I mean, I think to go back, I'm starting to babble a little bit, but to go back to Val's point, I think it helps. But when you're creating for Marvel and DC, like I said earlier, you're creating work for hire. I think you're more reluctant, even if you are David Walker, you are Greg Pak, you're reluctant to create a brand new character, a wholly original character for Marvel and DC because it's not yours anymore, right? Like, there's a reason Greg does independent work on the side. There's a reason David does independent work on the side, is because if they want to create their own characters, they should create them on their own, because then they own it. But if I create Amadeus Cho from Marvel, then that's Marvel's character.
It's
So
Marvel's character. Yeah.
but I think it does help to have people like a
Which
cognizant.
is why like that's why like the rise of Image Comics is like so big to me. Of this creator-owned content that now has these distribution numbers that are they're really significant, right? And I've said it a lot, and obviously I'm sure the numbers still are pretty lopsided, but like Image is a major player now. Like you can't just say, you can say DC and Marvel, yeah, they are the big two, but like especially when it comes to critical acclaim, like Image is kind of stepping all over a lot of stuff, and
I mean,
that's where you're
Saga's
finding
the best comic book on the marketplace right now, right?
Saga's the best and has been the best comic book on the marketplace for a few years, right? You have that. I mean, I can go through the amount of diversity and like straight quality on Image is kind of astounding right now. You know, you're talking about Saga, you're talking about
The Wicked and Divine,
Wicked
the
and
Rat
Divine,
Queen,
Sex Criminals.
the Sex
Wicked
Criminals.
and Divine. Maybe my favorite, because I just love the storytelling. I love Lazarus. Lazarus is the story of this just badass woman navigating through like the most treacherous somewhat apocalyptic kind of world, post-apocalyptic economic wise, not necessarily from a bomb or whatever. And the diversity of characters, and then, you know, we haven't even talked about like Bitch Planet, which is probably going to set the world on tilt for when it gets like a full run in it. And that's really important. But then again, like, because of their distribution, they are, I mean, is Image even indie? You know what I mean? It's creator owned, but it's not indie per se. So,
well, and then
but
Image is also. I mean, Image is, if you look at like The Walking Dead. I mean, Image as far as like that again, the cross media thing. Like Walking Dead's the biggest television show on the planet, and that comes from an Image book. And I think if you drill it back to Marvel and DC, like I think for both companies, their hottest, most critically acclaimed books, and in my opinion, so like for Marvel it'd be Ms. Marvel, and for DC you probably have like Batgirl or even Gotham Academy. Like those are very much in the Image mold, right? They star like women, they star women of color, right? Like they're not that kind of like 90s house style where it's all like rippling muscle men. You know what I mean? Like they're very unique in their art. Like I think that, you know, hopefully Marvel and DC is learning from that, from the success of Image and success of those kinds of publishers, and the success of those books like Ms. Marvel and Captain Marvel and Gotham Academy and Batgirl, like where you can have women centered and people of color centered in the books, and they're still popular, and they're still better, you know, more than that, they're good, they're really well written, really well drawn. And I think and you know, diverse in terms of just like art styles and storytelling styles, not just like the characters. So I think, you know, if you ask me, is Marvel and DC getting it? I think they're slowly getting it. They're slowly coming to the 21st century. I was on TV recently talking about Silk. I know there's some problematic stuff about Silk.
Saw that on TV.
but I think at the same time, like, you know, we are starting to, they're slowly coming into the 21st century. This, you know, relic of the mid 20th century. But it's still holding on to the remnants of that 20th century, and I think that more people like us pushing them to do it, that's why it's important. That's why we can't just say, Marvel and DC are racist, we should just, like, don't worry about it, let them keep their white superheroes. Like, no, we should hold their feet to the fire. I mean, to take it back to another thing, like, yes, the NFL, like the Washington football team is racist, but should we not make us think about it? Because, you know, like, they're racist and they're rich corporate entities, who cares, we can't do anything. Like, no, we should say, you know, change the name, right? That's the way I feel about Marvel and DC. Like, stop being racist. I'm not a sellout for wanting to see Marvel and DC include people who look like me and you in their writing talent, in their artist talent, and in their pages, right? And in their movies, and their TV shows.
I agree. I think it's going to be really interesting in DC. I mean, Marvel hasn't, you know, I don't think they've cracked the code. But if we're talking about diversity, over probably the last couple years, I think Marvel kind of just surged ahead with some of the initiatives they put forward, especially with the setbacks that DC had, right? Like specifically like the Batwoman thing and things like that. They had setbacks, and maybe it was that Marvel didn't make as many mistakes when it came to diversity as DC did for a little while. But you know, I think DC kind of had to do that with some of the talent that they're bringing on. I'm anxious to see it. I'm anxious to see it. Like, you know, I do want to see what David Walker does with Cyborg, right? Like, Cyborg has been kind of this running joke inside of like the Black Nerd Problems fam. Like, one of our writers, I could give him an hour and he could just crush everything about Cyborg. And you know, there was a certain arc during the Justice League, I think maybe like during the kind of the aftermath of Forever Evil, or maybe in the middle of it, when Jeff Johns was writing that, and he had like a couple of very cyborg-centric issues, and I kind of thought to myself, like, I wonder if I want to see a cyborg book, like even if it was a limited run. Like, there are things of this character I want to invest in, but there's a lot of problems with this character. Not problematic, but just kind of an empty character, has been for a while. So I am anxious to see what happens with that. I am anxious to see, you know, some of the, and that just kind of goes into some of these people, more diverse writers, more diverse creators kind of coming into it, and seeing what they do with these characters that either they're going to have to take a brand new original take on because, like, it's like Superman, they've been around forever, or I kind of feel like even though Cyborg's been around forever as part of teams and everything else like this, I feel like this is right. I think this is a real challenge. So that's, to me, like when those announcements came out, that's kind of some of the coolest thing that DC's done in a while. That has made me look forward to, you know, further content. And then, you know, of course, you have an announcement like that, and then you hear like G. Willow Wilson is like doing this all women Avengers team, and like it's like, oh, okay, well, you know, here we go. But those are the kind of things that give me hope in terms of kind of where that conversation can go and where that content can look like. So.
And Valerie, I'll go ahead and give you the last word as far as, like, you know, and you brought up Ghost in the Shell, and you brought up the idea that, like, you know, people who, when it comes to translating comics or anime into live action or into other media, do you think that, you know, we're coming to a place where we can expect more people of color being represented in movies and films that become adapted from source material that's comics or anime, or do you think we're going to be kind of just like William said, chasing our tail in this diversity argument for years to come?
I think the more that people talk about it and make it a discussion, and the more angrier people will get, the more diversity we'll see. And hopefully we won't start seeing it for diversity's sake. We'll be seeing good stories and people putting out good content and realizing that, you know, there's no such thing as there's no Japanese actress in Hollywood that can't play Motoko Kusama, or, you know, or you know, somebody who you can't find to, you know, play, you know, Superman or whatever. Like, there's no such thing. And I feel it's like this, you know, 600 years of white Jesus. We've had, you know, 400 years of slavery. You know, Japanese have been in internment camps, and they still want more. Like, why can't we just enjoy both facets, both sides of comics, and enjoy diversity without people having to take ownership of absolutely everything? Right. It's like, why can't we shine? Like, get that hate out your system. I just think that once people start speaking up about it and keeping the discussion going, we'll start to see more. Because they're going to have to give the people what they want to see. That's what this business is about.
That's right. Give the people what they want.
And the more we talk about diversity, you know, the more, you know, because again, like you mentioned before, they're only giving us what they think we want to see. So they think that we want to see white faces, you know, placed on other races, and people are, you know, I think they're starting to realize that that's not all we want to see. So hopefully, you know, the transition starts moving a little faster and we start seeing a little bit more diversity all over the place.
Well, one of the places I want to see that discussion happen is on the Nerds of Color, with Valerie Complex contributing some articles about that, so I'm looking forward to that. So I want to thank Valerie for joining Hard Knock Life, and like I said, looking forward to writing on the Nerds of Color. Also, big thanks to my man Will Evans. Again, find him on Twitter at Will Evans Writes and at BLKNRD Problems. That's Black Nerd Problems Twitter handle. And also find him at blacknerdproblems.com. Thanks for being on the show, Will.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm your boy Keith Chow. Thank you for joining Hard Knock Life. We'll try not to take another 2-month break, but I can't promise. See you next time.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard Knock Life, comics, movies, and TV. Yeah, pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit play, so check this. This is the Hard Knock Life, but not the chica kind. More like the people in the world seeking perspectives with a different line. The kids who share their interests together with a similar kind. When they said John Glover for Spider-Man, they didn't mind. The activists, directors, comments, and the lectures. Fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the end.